Hey guys, it's Matt here from Sweat Elite, and welcome back to the Sweat Elite podcast, another episode of In My Opinion. This is number 20 and the second of 2025. We're going to talk about plenty of interesting things today. Houston Marathon is 10 days away. I'm racing that. I'll talk a little bit about my preparation and what my goals will be. It'll be my fourth marathon in 4 months. Racing, selling out quickly. We have a question off the back of last week. I answered that last week, but I've got a good question coming sort of off the back of that. Short-term fatigue versus long-term fatigue. Good question about that coming in through the email. Stretching, is it a waste of time? I didn't answer this last week, even though it was on the questions and it was also on the timestamps. I totally forgot to answer it, but I don't really know the scientific answer to that, but I'll tell you what I think based on my own experiences. Workouts of the week, of course, as usual, which marathon that I'll run every month of the year this year, as it's tied to a question that's come in. And the Inside Running podcast, boys, I want to throw out some incentives to them to see if they will race against myself at the Ballarat Marathon. I've got some good ideas. I would love to see Moose and Croker back in their best shape. And I've got some ideas around some big incentives, which I don't think they'll like, but anyway, I'm going to throw them out there anyway. And a good one for Brady. Brady's is different to the other two because Brady's already in great shape and we're probably in very similar shape, or at least we were in Chicago, clearly, because we finished in a very similar position. But I'll talk a bit about that. And yeah, thanks to everyone that emails in every week. Really appreciate them all. I've got a lot banked, so plenty of episodes to come. I didn't realize... I actually told that edible story in the first couple of minutes of last week's episode about how I ordered the Uber Eats delivery to the wrong city. I didn't even plan to share that. It just sort of came to my head. And so many people thought that was hilarious. And actually, someone actually asked through my Instagram DMs if they think that consuming marijuana in the form of edibles, which is only illegal inside competition, and it's only illegal inside competition because it's against the spirit of the sport. It is not really deemed performance enhancing at all. And I would love for you to find someone that can convince me that it is performance enhancing. The only way it might potentially be performance enhancing, but if it is, and if it falls under this bracket, then many other substances would that are currently not on the bans list, is it's sort of like a disassociative thing. So Lyle O'Brien, who came on the podcast, would have been about a year ago, 213 guy, he spoke about this with me in detail. And this is not performance enhancing though. It just gives you the ability to sort of step back a little bit from the situation and see things at a distance. And when you're in a lot of pain, it can sort of reframe how you see pain. But if that's then deemed illegal on the ban list of performance enhancing, then many other things would be too. Like all painkillers probably would have to be, which they're not. Tylenol is not. In fact, I listened to a really good podcast speaking to Tylenol, which I'll talk about in a minute actually. It was to do with Ryan Hall. I'll get to that. But yeah, sorry, I didn't realize how many people would find that funny. And the question that came through my DMs about it was, do I think that it affects my performance in training if I'm, taking marijuana in the form of edibles? And my answer to that is not at all. Between you and I, that's me and everyone listening, I've done some big workouts straight after that. So before the Chicago Marathon, I think about 2 weeks before, this is way outside of competition, I did 2x10K in around 31 flat. I had a little bit of a tailwind that day. I did it straight down the lake front because I didn't want to do one into the wind and one against the wind, and I also didn't want to do them both into the wind. It was probably helped me by about 30 or 40 seconds. But I had a big night the night before, and it didn't affect me at all. I ran very, very well the next day. So yeah, for me personally, no. But sometimes when I talk about this thing, I feel like I'm a little bit... irresponsible, because if you're listening and you're under 25, do not go there. Just do not go there, period. There is a lot of evidence to show that's a thing. So I guess I wanted to answer that question, which is not really a proper IMO question, but it has become one. But I also just want to sort of fill in the gap there and say, yeah, do not do this if you're under 25. And otherwise, do your research and see if it might be for you. It's helped me with pain, but many people have... my colleague Luke, he doesn't like it at all. He's tried it and gives him anxiousness feelings and doesn't like it. So, yeah. Anyways, I'll get into all of those topics and answer lots of good questions that have come in. A couple of things first. I put out a YouTube video yesterday all about strength training and what I'm doing this year for strength training. I'm really trying to... I went all in, I guess, on the marathon last year, as in try to do sort of everything that I possibly could to improve. But I still think that gym is a place where I haven't quite figured it out at all. Last year, I basically just did 4 exercises once or twice a week. the same 4 exercises, and I was just doing it on intuition based on what I thought would help me. But I've since now collaborated with Joe Skipper's company, Valere mobile app, and I've known about that for a long time, and now I'm actually properly using it. I'm not necessarily sort of an ambassador or anything for it, but I mentioned on the video, go check it out if you're interested. We go through the 5 exercises that I'm doing now, which are all completely different to what I was doing. It's had quite a lot of good engagement straight away. But on the video I mentioned I was going to have a promotion code soon to use for you. So this is not necessarily a plug, although it kind of is. But this is just so that you can try it for a slightly cheaper price. I don't know if I even get a kickback from this. I haven't even I think maybe a little bit, but I don't know. It's brand deals nowadays to me are not a priority, although I'm, potentially going to be working here. Coros actually reached out to me this week, which was completely surprising. I'm not actually. It's funny because I've been talking about how I don't want to work with brand deals, and then one of the brands that's probably like one of the biggest in the space right now reaches out to me and asks if I want to do some sort of sponsorship deal. Not super sure what I'll do with that. I've replied back just saying, look, I'd love to test the watch and see where we go from there. But to be clear. I will do a little bit of sort of collaboration with brands here and there, but it's not really going to be a huge focus. And I just really want to work with brands that I really do believe in. So, for example, Stride was one I just didn't, even from the start, even before that came down, only because I just don't think I need to use it. I don't think there's an issue with, of course, there's an issue with the Stride management. In that, from what I understand, it looks like they support genocide. And support Israel's actions. Very clear to me that looks to be true, at least from my perspective. And I've even asked them specifically in email if that's what they do, and they haven't replied to that. But just the way that they handled me seemed like that. But the Stride device itself is something that I just don't need. But I do think that some people could potentially find it useful. But I still think that you can definitely do it without Stride or any device for that matter. But anyway, the promotion code for Valere, the strength conditioning app, is Sweat Elite 10. So the management team have said here, Sweat is active and will give Apple users 10% off and Android users 1 month free in addition to their 2-week free trial. Like Joe said, unfortunately, Google doesn't allow discount codes on the Play Store. So there you go. So Sweat Elite 10, SWEATELITE 10. That will see a small discount for you to use. Check it out. Go and have a look. I've been really enjoying it. I've used it for a month now. And yeah, I'm trying to find the right line here between just blatantly promoting brands that are giving me money and brands that I actually really like and really like to use. There's another brand that I'm going to be working with a little bit this year, at least on the podcast, is SaySky. They do sort of compete with Soar to some extent. I think Soar's racing gear and training gear is really hard to beat, but SaySky's sort of general apparel and just sort of like gym gear, I've always thought is unreal. And we've worked with them in 2022 and 2023, and I actually wear their stuff quite a lot, and I'm fortunate that I am somewhat friends with one of the guys in the team there, Tony. So huge thank you to Tony for reaching out, but we will be working a little bit with them this year too. So yeah, we'll see where we go. But that is there for you to use if you like. The promo code for the gym strength and conditioning app, which I've been using, and I really do think that they're going to it's going to be helping my cramping moving forward, because some of these exercises that I'm doing under the Valere app are like really targeting that area where I tend to cramp, the hamstrings and the gastrocs. So anyway, we talk a bit about that in the video if you want to go check it out. What else? Yeah, so this morning on my run, I speaking to the thing I said before about Tylenol, I was listening to one of the best podcasts. I have a huge podcast recommendation here that's not new. And I feel like I might have listened to a little bit of this podcast back when it came out in 2022. But I know a guy called Jeff. I've actually never met him, but he emails me all the time. I believe he's from Chicago. He often emails me before and after races, wishing me luck. And I think I might have met him briefly at some point. Jeff, sorry if I have mixed up with someone else. But he sent me an email the other day and said, hey, Matt, you should really listen to this podcast on The Drive, Peter Attia with Ryan Hall. It's episode 199, and he talks often about the speed gap and the sprints and the power in the gym and how important it is for the marathon. And so I went and looked it up, and I realized, oh man, it's actually quite old. It's from 2022. And so I thought, I'm just going to listen to it anyway and see what it's like. And I listened to it on the run this morning, and I actually started it last night and finished it off this morning. It is one of the best podcasts about running that I've listened to ever. 199 of The Drive. It's about 2.5 hours, 3 hours long, and they talk about speed, the importance of speed. Ryan talks about, so Ryan Hall, I mean, I'd say 95% of people listening would know who that is. He's the American record holder in the half marathon. He is he's run 2:04:58 for the marathon at Boston. That was not deemed an American record because Boston doesn't allow national records because it's slightly downhill. But yeah, he talks a lot about how he was doing 50-meter sprints in the middle of his marathon training. I think it was almost every week. He talks a lot about gym, and he's really made me realize how wrong I was about strength training up until quite recently, because I think I even preached on podcasts for a while, maybe even in my opinion, that I don't think strength training is super necessary for professional runners, because I noticed that a lot of the Africans weren't doing it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a good idea, because the more I've sort of done strength training, the more I speak to the Valair guys, the more I listen to podcasts, the more I listen to Scullion, the more I listen to all these people, I've realized that I was absolutely wrong. And I do think that strength training is important to get to your absolute peak performance. And I've definitely said in the past that I do not think so. And so I would like to change my opinion publicly on air that I do believe that in order to reach your absolute full potential in the marathon, I think gym does need to be included. I do think that you can get to about 99.5% of your ultimate performance in the marathon, maybe even 99.8 without doing gym. But if you want to squeeze out that extra 30 seconds or extra minute or two and really combat cramping, I do think that this is really important. But he speaks a lot about how, Ryan speaks a lot about how he was sort of doing exercises in the gym that he probably didn't need to do and he should have done that. And he reflects on all that. But what's also crazy is Ryan Hall's American record in the half when he ran 59.43. He speaks a lot about that, which is obviously interesting because there's a few guys going for that half marathon record in 10 days' time. And he talks about how it was his first half marathon as well, 59.43, and he said it felt really easy. Go listen to this podcast. I'm not going to ruin it anymore. He said he was just coasting. He felt really comfortable, but the way that he described the race was so interesting in that he spoke about the fact that, so this is 2007, I think, Houston Marathon, or maybe 2006, 6, 7, or 8, and he mentioned that he didn't have GPS watches back then, and what he was doing in that race. He actually says, when I was listening to this, I stopped and I took note of the timestamp, and he talks about something that I say all the time to the people that I coach. Because oftentimes, so I coach a lot of people, it's my main job right now, and oftentimes people will message me on Discord before a race and be like, what should my target pace be, or what should my target XYZ be? And I often say, well, we're not super, especially in 5K and 10K. Marathon, slightly different story, but 5, 10 and a half, I say, if it's a little bit hard for us to determine, maybe they're slightly newer to the coaching setup or whatnot, I say, I think we should do this by feel, and you should line up thinking, how do I distribute my effort the best I possibly can over this distance, 13 miles or 5K or 10K. And Ryan was talking about how that's what he was thinking about through that race. How do I distribute my effort over this distance as best I can? He wasn't really looking at the splits that much, a little bit. He wasn't looking at, heart rate wasn't even a thing then. He wasn't looking at anything else. And I just found it fascinating. So go and check that podcast out. And if you have any insights from that podcast, please email me. I'd love to talk to you about it and reflect more on it, because I find it hard to really get engaged and find running podcasts super interesting, I guess because I've just done so much of them myself. But that was one that it was really eye-opening. So yeah, episode 199 of The Drive, Peter Attia. One other thing actually on the podcast that I found interesting was Peter Attia used to be a long-distance swimmer. So that's the interviewer. And he was talking about how mental and psychological races can be. And I think Ryan said something like, in one of the marathons, he could see so far ahead of himself on a long straight road on one particular marathon, and it really drove him kind of semi-insane, because he could see how long there was to go until the end. And Peter Attia said that he totally understands that pain, and if it was him, he would have looked at the ground. And Peter says that they had so Peter, I think, used to compete at a somewhat reasonable level, maybe high level, in long distance swimming. And he said one of their golden rules in swimming was, and so they were swimming in the ocean, by the way, for the most part, was when they were swimming from one place to the other, obviously in the ocean, they would never look up and look at the land to see how far they were away. Never. That was like a number one rule. They would always look at the ground, at the seabed, or at the bottom of the ocean. And the way that they would know that they're coming close to the finish is that they would just notice the water getting shallower and shallower. As in, you could see the surface get closer and closer to you, and then you realize, oh, it's only 3 meters away or 10 feet away. Now I'm like really close to the end. And then you can put your head up and see, okay, I'm like 50 meters away or 100 meters away. But they said one of the things they learned really early on in swimming was never look to the finish. because if you do and it looks far away, it just sends the most negative signals to your brain, which then basically makes your body just semi-shut down. So yeah, I took a lot from that. I think we can relate a lot of that same idea to running, in that, it's the same thing. Like if you look down at your watch and you're struggling with 5K to go on a marathon and you see a pace you don't want to see, it will almost certainly make you slow down further. And it makes you start to wonder, okay, so how should I approach these races and how should I think and what should I focus on? Anyway, go and listen to that podcast. I've pretty much already told you everything that's on there, but it's so good. All right, Inside Running Podcast, boys. Here's my incentives. Before we go into the questions, I've already been 15 minutes and I haven't even started the questions. I'm not even super close. So this is what I thought would be a good idea, because I personally think that... So I listened to Inside Running Podcast. I used to be a pretty avid listener. I was a Patreon for a while, 2019, 2020, bit of 2021. They then started bagging me out randomly for things that I don't think were warranted, so I stopped my Patreon. But I've listened to it here and there since. And, the bagging out, that's all cool. That's all as in, that's not cool. It's just a bit of competition and a bit of drama. But here's a little bit more drama. Now, Moose, who has run 2:14 for the marathon in 2019, that's not very long ago. And he's only, I think he's 11 months older than me. So there's no reason why he can't get back into shape and have a good challenge with me and actually beat me in Ballarat Marathon on April the 27th. So I'm going to offer Moose and Croker 5,000 Australian dollars to beat me at Ballarat Marathon. It's about 3,500 US, maybe 3,200 US. Now, if I beat them though, they have to pay me 10% of that. So they have to pay me $500 Australian if I beat them. But if they beat me, they make 5,000 Australian dollars in cash. I think this might hopefully get both of them into gear, because I know Spence has the ability to run 2:15, 2:16 again. That's what I'd love to run in Ballarat, 2:16. Well, it depends how Houston goes. If Houston is 2:16, then maybe faster. But if I go backwards, then we'll have to reassess. But at least all things, at the moment point to that being possible or not impossible. So $5,000 for Julian Spence and Bradley Croker to beat me at Ballarat, provided I make the start line, and that's it, as long as I can get there. And what I mean by that is no injury, no sickness. 10% they pay me if they win, $500 Australian dollars. Brady, very different, because I actually think Brady and I have a good race on our hands. I mean, Chicago, we ran together for 34K, I think, and he prepared for the most part in cold, which is just his home. I prepared in the heat, so that would help me. Brady, if I beat Brady, Brady has to do a full beer mile that afternoon at Ballarat Marathon, and vice versa. If Brady beats me, I have to do a full beer mile that afternoon, and the beer mile has to be. I was thinking about a time, but I was like, nah, just do a beer mile, because that's straight after a marathon, hours after a marathon. That would literally be the last thing you feel like doing. I mean, how you normally organize with your friends and say, oh, let's get together and go out for beers, and it almost never happens. That's how tired you get. Imagine having to go and do a beer mile. So that's what I thought would be a good idea for Brady. I'm not super sure if Brady will find that very incentivizing though. But I didn't want to throw out a money thing to Brady as if I didn't want to act as if I feel like I'm fitter than him, because I really don't. I see some of his training sometimes, I'm like, oh, man, that's I don't even know if I could do that. So I think that's a good little side, funny challenge. Beer mile, that is 400 meters beer, 400 meters beer, 400 meters beer, 400 meters beer. Although I think the beer comes first. Either way, we'll look at those rules. But it'll be good if the loser does break 10 though, if possible. But I'm not going to hold you to that. Cool. That is the Inside Running Podcast incentive challenge for Ballarat Marathon on April the 27th. 27th, yeah. Because I really need to decide which race I'm going to do on that weekend. There's London, which I don't think I can get into, even though I have requested to get into the elite field. They actually wrote back and said I can, but I need to be part of a UK club, which I think I can sign up to. So I may be able to get into that field. I'm probably leaning more towards Manchester and Ballarat though, only because I know a lot of people running Manchester. A good friend of mine's going to Manchester. I might even have G'd up Joe Skipper to race me at Manchester. Joe, if you're listening, I'd love to race you there, and locking that in may be the deciding factor. But I have already put these challenges out there to Inside Running Podcast, and I will not go back on my word. So if they say yes, I'm definitely in Ballarat. But if they say no and none of them race that, look, if Ballarat was the same distance away to Manchester, 10 hours, I'd probably just do Ballarat. But Ballarat is just so far away from where I live. It's a good 25 to 30 hours, whereas Manchester's like 10. So if the Inside Running Podcast Challenge is not on, probably leaning towards Manchester, but let's see. There's also Hamburg on the same day. It's a weekend just stacked with races. But anyway, be good to lock that challenge in, boys. So keen to hear your Ryan Greenwood from Perth. He often filters me emails about what's going on the podcast. So thanks for that in case I miss it or I don't listen, because I'm too busy listening to Joe Rogan and Huberman and comedy podcasts all the time. I don't, as I said before, I don't really listen to too many running podcasts. But yeah, there we go. Put it out in the podcast and then I'll lock in Ballarat. But Houston is in 10 days and my goal is to run another personal best. So I ran 2:19:31 in October, 2:18:41 in November, 2:19:45 in December, but I had a bit of a rough run that day with asthma, and I don't think I trained enough on the hills, and I'm just generally not a very good hill runner. So that was a bit of a challenge. But I do think that I can get under 2:18, and I actually think I could maybe run under 2:17. So I'm going to try. I do know one individual by the name of Dylan who reached out to me on Strava after he saw that I posted somewhere that I'm doing Houston. I think he saw on my Instagram. And he's going out in 68 flat or just under 67:45. And I think I'm going to run with him because I haven't heard of anyone else that is running 2:17, 2:18. And my belief is, and this is something I think a lot of people don't know, and this is actually legitimately what the Inside Running Podcast boys were having a go at me about in Osaka Marathon in 2023, is that I reckon if I go out at 67:50 with someone, working with someone, and even just like psychologically knowing you're with someone and it's just like you're working with someone, I think that is slightly easier than going out in 68:40 or 68:30. So, a difference of 50 seconds on my own. So to reiterate, I think going 67:50 through the half with someone is about the same effort or maybe even slightly easier than going, say, 68:40, 68:30, just running on my own. So it makes sense to me to go out faster. And I think I've run so much to feel in training and racing. And this happened in Indianapolis, actually. I went out in 68:19. I led most of the way in the first half, but even having people around you and behind you is helpful because people were, Charlie Lawrence was with me and Mitch Ammons, and we were all sort of encouraging each other and working together. There was about 7 of us, I think. I think that this really helps psychologically keep you in the game. And I noticed that about 17 miles, I think it was, 17 or 18 miles, 27, 28K, I knew I wasn't going to be able to hold that pace. So I immediately went from running about 5:12 a mile to about 5:18 a mile, or 3:13 a K to like 3:18 a K. And then I sort of kind of held that to the end. And so I think I can do that again here. And so if I can only just get a little bit further at that faster pace, 32K, 20 miles, something like that, and then adjust, if I even have to adjust, then I think I can sort of salvage a 2:17. But let's see. Who knows? Might blow up and run 2:30, 3 hours. I don't know. But that's just the goal. That's what I'm going to do. And I mean, if you're listening to this podcast and you're going for like 2:17:30 and you're going out in like 68:30 to 68:45, please do let me know on Instagram or Strava or email, because I'd probably prefer that, about 68:30, 68:15. But that's all I know of right now. So yeah, I really noticed that in races is that if in 2023, a fair few times I went out in like 70 and I was kind of like pretty much alone. And that would be harder than going out in like 69:15 with a pack. And so, yeah, that's the idea for Houston. All right. I think that's about all for the housekeeping, the intro, the incentives, the silly business. All right. Questions. Matt Persick. Good, Matt. Thanks for emailing. Luke's friend. I've actually done a couple of workouts with Matt. Hi, Matt. As always, enjoy all the content you put out, especially enjoying your series with Luke, the training talk. The latter's come a long way from running with no watch and phone in hand to pushing towards a goal of sub 225, which I'm certain he will achieve in the near future. A thought on the topic of marathon races selling out too quickly. I don't know how you or I can solve this problem, but here is an idea that maybe someone listening will hear and can help make a change. I would like to see the major marathons have a qualification process involving completion of a qualifier races before gaining access to the majors. Boston has a process in place already around time, which I think is good and bad. NYC has something where if you run 3 or 4 New York road runner races, local races, half marathons and 10Ks, you can guarantee access for that year's running of the New York City Marathon. I'd like to see that system implemented for all the majors so more runners who have proven commitment and done the necessary training can get into these races guaranteed. I know this would create a more localized approach to the majors for the masses, but is that such a bad thing? My gut feeling, based on no data, is small. Local races are dying out and people are flocking to big city marathons over small cities and shorter races. This system would give race directors of smaller races a chance to gain popularity, generate more revenues so they don't need to increase entry fees, and create a bridge to the marathon. Matt, I reckon you have come up with the solution that I could not come up with last week. I think it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Show your commitment. So you've basically identified that the major marathons are the big ticket. That's what everyone wants to do. People that start running, they see the majors on TV and they go, I want to run New York or Boston, whereas they might have never run a marathon before. And what that's doing is causing an insane amount of people to apply. And then many people that have run 10, 15, 20 marathons miss out, and newbies sometimes get in. Now, okay, whatever. If you try and give an analogy towards a music festival, like who cares? But it's different because this is an effort-based thing. This is something that I feel like people should be rewarded for their work if they've committed to the sport and run well. So I like it. I think I like it. I think, getting into the nuances of this might be slightly tricky, as in the races have so much income now from sponsors. This is the major marathons. They should be able to hire a team of people to actually action this. I like it. I think it's great. And you're right. It then does basically mean that it's almost blocked off for the new runners. They need to do a few smaller races first. So I like it. I think we should do that. Yeah. I'm going to think more about this and maybe return to it in another podcast, because I feel like that's actually a brilliant idea. All right. Moving on. Email from Kev Cuts. Hi, Matt. Big fan of the podcast and YouTube channel. You've definitely a breath of fresh air amongst the throngs of influencers word vomiting the same advice and tips. Keep on keeping on. Amongst the throngs of influencers word vomiting the same advice. Heart rate? My question for you is how to self-diagnose or distinguish between what I'll call local or short-term fatigue. I.e., you've just finished a massive week and obviously tired, but a few days of easy running should have you back to feeling normal. Versus overtraining. I remember watching a video on Midlife Runner's YouTube channel, I coach Midlife, great guy, where he talked about how all of the data pointed to him being in PB shape before his goal marathon, and then it turned out he was overtrained. I think it's easy, at least for recreational mid-packers, to maintain a certain level of volume and intensity without realizing you are training too hard. I know for myself that sometimes I don't realize how much fatigue I built up until I take 1 to 2 days off, and then I feel like it hits me like a ton of bricks, and I feel almost worse for a period than if I had just kept training hard. What are some signs and symptoms to watch out for, and when it is okay to keep pushing? Thanks. This is a fantastic question. And this is one that I'm coming at you with no science, just based on my own experiences, because I've absolutely experienced a lot of both. Not so much overtraining. I actually have had very few bouts of overtraining. Maybe luck, maybe intuition, who knows, but I've had a lot of bouts of the short-term one. But I have had a couple of bouts of overtraining. I think the things to look out for are poor sleep is a big one. If you're sleeping poorly for longer than 2 nights in a row, that's a big sign. Now, people listening to this that know me well and have listened to more than a couple of hours of me probably know that I'm not a big heart rate guy. But with that said, an elevated heart rate in the morning and the evening substantially will be an indicator as well. Now, I'm not a big heart rate guy based off following heart rate when you're running, responding and making decisions about it when you're running. I'm not against heart rate in this sense at all. But if your heart rate is generally 40, I think mine's normally about 36, 37 in the mornings, and at night, high 30s, at least I've noticed a couple of times I've recorded that. If it's randomly just 50 and 60 all of a sudden in the evenings and the mornings, that's probably a little bit of a red flag. Poor sleep, but I think also irritability as well. If you're just generally quite irritable, flat, tired, and just really feel like it's really difficult to get out of the door, I think that's a pretty big sign of overtraining. But specifically talking to Midlife Runner, I think his was a combination of... So I gave him, like I do to most of my athletes, I give people the license to sort of extend their easy running if they want to. But I always give them a warning. I said, you've got to listen to your body. But if I give you a 60-minute easy run and you want to go 80, that's fine. But just make sure that it's not going to be a detriment to your hard workouts. That's the point in which you have to stop. As soon as you notice that your easy running is affecting your hard workouts, you've done too much easy running. So I don't actually program easy running pacing really specifically. I do give people a specific number and a specific duration of time to run towards, but I say in the beginning when I start coaching them that you can be flexible with this. If I give a 60-minute run and you feel horrendous, do 40, do 30. If you feel fantastic, do 80. But you have to notice when you're starting to find your specific workouts a real challenge. And I think in the case of midlife runner, I think he actually dealt with a bout of not heat stroke, but a minor heat injury potentially. Now, I don't know if he's said that, but I know for sure that he was really struggling because he lives in Texas and it's really, really hot there where he was training. So I think this probably was a combination of those two things. And when you're training in extreme heat, I don't know if overtraining and heat injury are sort of blended into the same thing, or whether or not heat training means that you can, as in like if you train really hard in the heat, it means you can overtrain easier, or they might be two kind of separate things. Because I know there's rhabdo and there's all these other sort of heat injuries and heat stress stuff. I've had a heat. I've personally had a heat injury in Singapore in 2016, and I was absolutely not overtraining at the time because I was actually very unfit and I was actually quite overweight and heavy for myself. I was working full time in an office, 60 hours a week, and I did a triathlon relay. I did the half marathon leg and half Ironman, 70.3, and I blanked out in the last couple of miles, last 5K, and ever since I've had a very hard time in the heat. So I actually I didn't have to be hospitalized, but I had to go to the medical tent for a while, and ever since then I've had a very difficult time in the heat. And that's the thing. There's lots of athletes that have had that. So I think he might have experienced something like that, but maybe slightly minor to what I had. I don't know. But it's a great question. It's a little bit difficult to distinguish between these two things, to be honest, but I think you can by noticing the poor sleep over a longer period of time, irritability, elevated heart rate over a longer period of time. And I think that if you're training really hard, getting to a point where you are potentially overtraining, you can always afford to take 3 days off or easy, always. Because if you're at a point where you're wondering if you've overtrained, you clearly banked a lot of training in the previous 2 to 3 months. And if you take 3 days off and it's a short-term fatigue, you should bounce back and feel fine at that point. If you take 3 days off and you feel worse or the same, then that's a problem. And I think that you probably need to consider taking a longer time off or longer time of just very easy running. So, yeah. People that are in the medical field, or maybe David Littman or something like that, will probably be able to answer this better than me, but that's my best answer. Okay. Email. Andrew. Hi, Matt. Love the IMO podcast. Love the IMO episodes. This and interviewing top triathletes and runners are my favorite episodes. I have 2 questions / requests for you. First, opinions on swimming for recovery, possibly better than cryo and sauna. I've recently been swimming for 30 minutes after long runs and workouts, and must say it feels so much better. It's as if I'm back to 100%. I used to do 10 minutes cold, 10 minutes hot, 5 cold, 5 hot, but just feels the swimming has better results. It doesn't seem to be talked about amongst runners. Any opinion or science to answer this? Second, sorry, just having some water. Second is 1 or 2 workouts for a 10-mile race. Have done 3x3K at race pace. The race is 4 weeks out. Thanks, regards, Andrew. Okay, so I haven't heard too many people doing swimming. I know Nick Simmons, 800-meter runner, who was an Olympian, 5th at the London Olympics, 142.9. I know he used to do a lot of swimming for recovery and swore by it. If you go back to his logs in his training book, in his training ebook that he put out, he does a lot of swimming. I think it was like 3 to 4 times a week in the afternoons. He swore by it. I don't see too many other people even trying it, but the reality is a lot of people can't swim. When I moved to Finland and I was at a training camp in Portugal and I just sprinted into the beach and started swimming and wondered why all the Finnish guys were standing on the beach, I was like, guys, get in. It didn't occur to me that they couldn't swim. No offense to the friends I have, because I can't do cross-country skiing very well anyway. And I can't play a lot of sports. But that's the reality. So a lot of people probably just don't try it. Like, for example, Reem, she's not a swimmer. She never really learned how to swim. She can do a couple of laps, but she can't swim for 30 minutes. It would take her a few months to be able to do that. So, yeah, I don't think too many people try it. But I think it's good. I don't swim too much. But now that you've sent me this, I do have a pool available to me in the centre that I do my track sessions and gym. So I might start doing a bit of that. I like it. Cryo, I've never really been into cryo that much. Sauna, I think, sauna is absolutely helpful, especially for, if you're preparing for a hot race. But for recovery, I reckon I would bet that swimming probably is better than cryo and sauna, probably. So I would keep that up, yeah. Second one is 2 workouts for a 10-mile race. Have done 3x3K at race pace. The race is 4 weeks out. So 2 workouts for a 10-mile race. Well, 10 miles is sort of pretty much the same as a half marathon training, that is, because the race is going to be around 50 to 60 minutes, and a half is between, for most people listening, 65 to 2 hours. So it's slightly different, I guess, in terms of the training, but it's the closest to the half marathon. So any of the half marathon specific workouts that I've shared would be perfect. One really classic one that comes to mind is just 4 sets of 2K, 1K. 2K at half marathon goal pace, 1K a little bit faster, with 1 minute between the 2K and the 1K, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes between the sets. Another one is just 10 by 1K, where you're sort of starting at half marathon goal pace with a minute rest and slowly getting a little bit faster throughout, ending at pretty close to your 10K goal pace. That's a really good one. What else? 5K, 4K, 3K, 2K, 1K with 1K float recovery. 5K starting at sort of just slower than the goal pace and winding up, getting faster and faster. So the 2K and the 1K are at your 10K or half marathon or 10 mile in this case goal pace with 1K recovery. That's a good one to do for sure. So there's a few good ones for you. But I think if you go back through the In My Opinion podcast and go to any of those half marathon workouts or even the 10K workouts, you'll probably get a lot of bang for your buck to race a 10 mile race. So good luck to you, Andrew. All right, workouts of the week. Workouts of the week. Thank you to everyone that tags me into these. I really appreciate you when you do. I think in the last week, once again, probably had 50 to 60. I wake up every day and have 3 to 5. It's awesome. So please do keep doing so. Roughly half of these I count with myself, and roughly the other half I notice someone doing something similar, adapt it a little bit, or just straight up steal it and tell them and give them credit. In that case, maybe don't tag me. Maybe tag the person that I mentioned. 5K, 10K workout. 15 minutes warm-up. This is a really simple one, but I like it. And I've not really shared it before, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone do it. But it's just 3 sets of 1 mile at 10K effort, 1 minute rest, 1K at 5K effort, and then 3 minutes rest. There you go. 15-minute cool down. I was going to repeat myself then, but I just take up too much time in this podcast repeating myself. So just skip backwards if you want to hear that again. And these are all written in the podcast description if you are out running currently and you would like to save them. Half marathon workout. This is a big one, but it's very effective. And it's probably one I wouldn't recommend to really new runners, but someone that's run 5 half marathons and maybe a couple of marathons absolutely can do this. 15-minute warm-up and then 15K of 15 kilometers. Once again, sorry to people in the freedom units. Kilometers are the actual way to measure things. I say that, and like 70% of my audience is from the UK and the US, which is in miles, so don't turn it off. 15K of 1K at half marathon effort with 500 float. And the float should be around 20 to 30 seconds per kilometer slower than the 1K. Maybe even 15 to 25 seconds actually slower than the 1K. So 15K of 1K on, 500 float. So once again, for me, that would be 1K at about 305 and then 500 meters at about 325 to 330 pace. So pretty close to marathon, maybe slightly slower than marathon pace. 15K. 15-minute cool down. That's it. Very effective workout. Marathon. This is a 20-mile workout or a 32K workout. 32K to be exact, just shy of 20 miles. 10K warm-up, just at your regular aerobic pace, just the same pace you do your easy runs, nothing more. Take a quick break, take in some carbs, have a quick dynamic stretch and get ready to go. 10K straight at marathon effort. If you've got perfect weather and you feel good, make that marathon goal pace. If you don't and it's slightly windy or you don't feel the best due to poor sleep or stress from work or, whatever it might be, maybe go 3 to 5 seconds per kilometer slower than your goal pace. 10K at marathon effort, so that's the first part. 1K easy. 5K starting at marathon pace, goal pace, working down to half marathon goal pace. So it's a 5K progression, getting faster and faster and faster. 1K jog, and then 3K back at marathon pace. Now, the reason this is a pretty effective workout is because in the middle of the workout here, you're basically raising your lactate level a little bit in that 5K progression. You're faster and faster and faster to the point where you're really at threshold or maybe slightly faster. And then you have to deal with that. You have to go back to marathon pace. And so sometimes in races, at least for me, someone might surge a little bit in the pack that I'm in and I pick it up and I don't even really fully realize that we've picked it up a little bit and that'll hurt me down the road. But if you've practiced this a few times in training, you'll probably be able to respond well to that. So I think this is a great workout. And to finish off with 2K cool down after that 3K at marathon effort. So I will rehash this again because I jumped all over the place there. 10K warm up, 10K at marathon effort, 1K jog, 5K at marathon goal pace, unless the weather's horrendous, then just go slightly off goal pace. 5K at marathon goal pace, working down to half marathon goal pace, 1K jog, 3K at marathon effort, again, same as the 10K, and then 2K easy to finish off with, 32K. I haven't done that workout, but I will soon. I just made that up when I was thinking about workouts, and I thought it was a good idea. So just make sure you do plenty of fueling within that run. Okay, questions. I've got a load from Strava, so I'll just go through these. Most of these are sort of quick, rapid fire, so I'll probably go through them pretty quickly. Okay, Joseph, Strava comments. Hardest barrier to break in running. So I probably need a little bit more clarity here around what you mean. I'm assuming you don't mean for myself, you mean in general. And barriers are interesting in that, I found it funny that like when I broke a lot of people were invested in the journey to break 220 for myself. Now I'm going to relay this back to just general barriers. But as soon as I broke it, I feel like setting a barrier of like 217, it's like, it's not a whole, it is a whole number, but it's not there's probably a word for this, but like once the 2 hour marathon gets broken, it won't be super interesting to see if someone could break 159. It'll be interesting to some people, but not to the masses. And so barriers sort of come in intervals of 5, I think. It's either 220 or 215 or 210 or, 10 flat for the 100 or 4 minutes for the mile. But then breaking 358 for the mile is not, it's just, you know what I'm getting at? It's like, so it has to be like a full round number, even though all numbers are full and round, but you're getting the point. And so the first thing that comes to mind here for men is probably the 800 and breaking 140, because that's a very round number. It's interesting that it's 100 seconds. Now, I think that's probably currently the hardest barrier to break. But then I thought, well, what's the 1500 barrier to break? Because the record's 326 flat. Is 325 flat a round number? Yeah, I guess it is. So that's probably about the same, I would say. Half marathon, breaking 57, it just doesn't seem as exciting. The 10K, it would need to break 26 flat, which is probably not going to happen anytime soon. I believe the current world record is 26.15, 26.20, and that was a bit questionable, to be honest, in my eyes. Middle of COVID. No, Joshua Chapter guy had no... Anyway. The 5K, I believe that's 12.35. So actually, breaking 12.30 could be a good one as well. So I'm thinking only about the men. The women's, I'm not as familiar with the women's world records here, but I know the 1500 was 350 has been broken. 150 in the women's is probably not going to happen anytime soon because the record's currently 153, and breaking 153 is not anything like breaking 4 in the mile or breaking 2 in the marathon. It's not, just doesn't have the same feel to it. Women, 210 was just broken, obviously. 62 in the half could be broken soon, but that's not as interesting. And 60 will not be broken anytime soon. 10K, I believe it's already 28.40 something, so breaking 28, that won't happen anytime soon, I don't think. And even if it did, is 28 such an interesting number? So it sort of comes down to like, what's an interesting number? And my gut feeling is probably the men's 800, 140. I would say that's probably the hardest barrier to break. But I'm not super sure what you mean by barriers, but I've just run with what I think you mean. Cassidy, Strava comments. Toughest lesson you have ever learned in your running journey? Wow, that is a great question. Toughest lesson you have ever learned in your running journey? The toughest lesson. I don't know. I don't have anything really coming to mind. I've certainly been... Okay, I'm going to actually divert to say things I've been really wrong about, because I don't know about any tough lessons, but for a long time, I thought diet was meh. I didn't think it was useless, but I just thought, just eat anything and you'd be fine. And I think that's probably because I kind of got away with that for a while when I was in my late teens and early 20s. But now I have completely changed my opinion about diet, to the point where I had an interesting conversation with someone actually on Instagram before, and they asked me what I think about the Alpha Fly 1 and the different colors and whether they're different, like as in the fluoro Alpha Fly 1 different to the purple Alpha Fly 1? And I said, I don't think so. They all feel the same to me. And then he said, have you tried the Asics Metaspeed Sky? And I said, yeah, I have. It was actually number 3 on my list of super shoes of the year. And he said, oh, I just noticed that the Adios Pro 4 isn't in your list of super shoes for 2024. And I said, yeah, that's because I just didn't try it. And he goes, well, you're not interested in trying it? And I said, well, kinda, but the super shoe game, in my opinion, is just so overhyped. It's so overhyped. And I said something that I think I'm going to reiterate here. I said, if the people that are so fascinated about super shoes switch their attention to becoming fascinated about diet and power to weight ratios, I can guarantee you that they'll improve much faster if they focus on the nutrition and the power to weight ratio as opposed to the shoes. Because I think now, in 2019, 2020, or 2018, this was not the case. But now, basically all the top brands, Nike, On, Asics, Adidas, all those top guys, even 361 Degrees, Brooks, Saucony, I think all of the super shoes now are basically as good as each other, more or less. Now it just comes down to what your personal preference is. And so what I don't understand about the fascination about the shoe game is, you give me an Alphafly 1 or a 361 Degree or an On shoe or a Asics Metaspeed Sky. I mean, I think they're going to be a difference of 20 seconds in a marathon. Whereas if you focus on diet and nutrition for 3 months, you could make a difference of 3 to 5 minutes in a marathon. And you could actually change your life for the better, as opposed to spend money on something that you don't need. And so I've gone way away from your question, Cassidy, sorry. But what my point is, I think the toughest lesson I've learned maybe is that diet is a huge deal when it comes to running. And not necessarily only about losing weight and power to weight ratio improving. I think just generally putting things into your body at the right time. Ketones, creatine, carbs, the right type of carbs. I respond super well to white rice, not so much to other types of carbohydrates. And protein at the right time. Like if you can get this down pat, you will improve in the marathon in my mind without question. Whereas if you change super shoes, nah, sorry. So Cassidy, sorry, probably not the best answer, but that's the best one I've got for you for now. All right. Mr. Nikosi, Strava comment. I've noticed that you do a significant carb load for your 220 marathons, which was surprising to me. Do you think that you and most athletes have been under fueling, particularly with carbohydrates during training and for races? Okay, so this is a great question. And actually someone asked me on Strava last week about my diet, and they obviously haven't heard the episode about what I did this year for diet. So I'll do a quick couple of minute rehash. So the full version of this is on YouTube. If you go back to probably August, I put a YouTube video about how I lost 10 pounds in, 2 months, 10 weeks, something like that, and why. So if you just go to the Sweat Elite YouTube channel and skim down about 10 videos, you'll find it. So there's the full detail. So I'm just going to give you a short one here. But I came up with my own idea that really worked last year, and that was to basically try and be in a calorie deficit for all of the periods of time that are not super close to hard workouts. So I didn't view it in a sense of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I viewed it as in, okay, I'm doing a hard workout on Wednesday morning, which means that sort of the 12 hours either side of that, or 18 hours either side of that, that's when I am not focusing on calorie deficit. That's when I'm focusing on carb loading. So in that period of time, I use the example all the time of say Wednesday morning is the hard workout. Tuesday lunch, afternoon dinner, big carbs. Wednesday morning, big carbs, workout, big carbs straight after the workout. And then I go back to low carbohydrate for the next period of time until I enter that next phase of you're close to a hard workout. And in that other phase, I focus on having high amounts of protein, very low carbs. There may be some sort of fat adaptation process there. I've never really fully understand the fat adaptation thing, even though I've watched a whole lot of videos on it. I kind of understand the basics, but I think doing a whole lot of easy running on low carb can be a good thing, potentially, although there's a lot of people that will disagree with me on that. I do think that there's a lot of people that have found beneficial results in that, even though the science sort of points otherwise. But yeah, when I'm outside of that period of time where I'm not loading on carbs in and around hard workouts, so Sunday morning, long run usually, Saturday lunch, afternoon dinner, Sunday morning, big carbs, loads of rice, loads of pasta. I would say between midday Saturday and midday Sunday, I'm probably having about 600 to 700 grams of carbs. That's a lot. That's a huge amount. But then when I leave that period of time, I'm going right back to having pretty low calorie, high protein, high fiber. The only time I'm having carbohydrates is really from fruit and vegetable, which is, especially fruit, is high in carbs, but low calorie. Blueberries, strawberries, these things are pretty low calorie and not super high carb, but you're getting some carbs. So that's the short version. But if you want to see the long version of that, go and watch that video on YouTube for sure. But back to the question. I've noticed that you do a significant carb load for your 220 marathons, which do you think that you and most athletes have been under fueling? Yeah. Yep, that's a simple answer. Yeah, before this year, I think I was under fueling because the first time I ever really noticed this, even though I knew about it, was in 2020, and I raced a marathon in Japan in Lake Biwa. I ran 2:24, 3-minute PR. That's what set my Achilles off. And in that race, I experimented with, based off a tip someone gave me, I experimented with having about 100 grams of carbs an hour in the form of those Japanese jellies, those ins, those char gels, because they have them in convenient 7-Eleven stores over there. Not char gel brand, but the same thing in a different branding. And I put one of those on every single table, so 5K, 10K, 15K. And I didn't realize that I actually took in about 120 grams of carbs. I actually didn't realize until after the race, because I picked one off every table and I had most of it. Everyone has 45 grams of carbs. I didn't have the whole thing every time, especially towards the end when I struggled to take in fuel. But I finished that race very strong. I've kind of almost even split it, and I felt really good. And I recovered very well from it, except my Achilles. And that was the point, March 2020, when I was like, fueling, I think, plays a bigger role than I thought. Now I think, of course it does. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, for sure. That's the simple answer. During training, for sure. I mean, my recommended podcast of the year of 2024 was David Roche's podcast, and he is huge on fueling. He's going 130, 140 grams of carbs an hour, even though the science says 90 and 100 is the max you need to go. There's not much point in going over that. He's ignoring that, and oftentimes when people ignore science, sometimes it still works. And I agree with him. I think that 100 to 120 for me is great, even though I've had many people send me videos of saying 90 is enough. There's no use in going above 90. I've tried 90 in training, and I've tried 120 in training, and I think 120 is definitely more powerful personally for me. So, yeah. All right, I got loads more questions here, but I'm not going to get to them because I spent too long dishing out stupid incentives to other podcasts and talking about things that probably aren't very interesting. But I didn't address here the stretching yet. Is a waste of time. So there's a lot of research done on here, and I've had physiotherapists send me research to say stretching doesn't do anything, and then I've overheard Rich Roll talk with David Roche actually about stretching and how they find it useful and beneficial. I don't know the science here. I've read different things and watched different videos. My gut feeling, based on what I've done, is that stretching is useful in small doses. Simple as that. After runs, 5 minutes. Stretch every main muscle in your leg for 30 seconds to a minute. Enough. Before workouts, warm up, couple of quick dynamic stretches, hamstring, quad, calf, hip flexors, couple of quick dynamic stretches, maybe only for a couple of seconds each, good to go. I think the question and the controversy, lacking a better word, comes in when people do excessive amounts of stretching. And I think that there's probably no benefit there, or potentially even a negative effect there from what I've understood. I've never done excessive stretching, but I have heard about people. In fact, the podcast with Ryan Hall that I mentioned at the start with Peter Attia, they talk about this. And Ryan Hall says that based on his understanding, doing a lot of stretching is actually a detriment. So yeah, and that definitely aligns with what the physios have told me as well, physiotherapists that actually send me the research. So yeah, that's the answer I have, and that's based on just my own experiences. I stretch for 3 to 5 minutes after every single run, basically, static that is, and I think that I've found a little bit of benefit in that, just loosening up the hamstrings especially and the hips. Calves, I don't really think it does anything for me. Like if I stretch or if I don't, I feel the same the next day, because sometimes I forget or I run out of time, but usually I do. But the dynamic stretching getting ready for a workout, absolutely. I don't think anyone's ever debunked that to say that's useless. So 15-minute jog or a 20-minute jog or whatever it is you warm up, and then doing a few leg swings and quick movements with the quad and the calf. So sort of snap movements where so you know how your quad muscle, everyone probably knows what a dynamic stretch is, but if you don't, you know how if you stand up and you put your foot to your bum and you hold your foot, that's a quad stretch. If you just do that for like a second, a quick pull and then release, that's dynamic. And I think that that's very useful for before training, after you warm up, that is. Definitely don't do it before warm up, but that's my opinion on that for sure. Okay, I'll answer one more here. There's a lot more, but I did mention at the start in the intro that I'll talk about the marathons I'm going to do this year. So this question is related to that. So Ali AR on Strava asks, listen to your training talk released on December 24. I heard you're looking for a flat March marathon. Napa and Modesto marathon are both in North Cal and are pretty flat. Napa is point to point and a bigger race though. Modesto is dead flat but a smaller course, so you might be running alone most of the time. CJ Alperton has the course record of 2:16. Thank you. I really appreciate people sending in ideas to race. But I have already locked in my March marathon, and I am going to be running the McCurdy Micro. Is it still called Micro? McCurdy Road to Tokyo in New York. because the race is set up very well for elite runners. We get a table every 5K, and a lot of people ran really well there last year. So I've already locked that in. I actually booked it last week. So my rough plan is Houston. So once again, I said this in the video to strength training yesterday. I'm not going to stick religiously to running a marathon every single month of the year, but I would like to run one roughly every 4 to 6 weeks. But if something happens, sickness, injury, I'm not going to force my way through a marathon. That's just asking for trouble. But if things work out, I would like to do Houston, January 19, Osaka, February 24, McCurdy, March 29, I think, April 27, Ballarat or Manchester, probably not London, but potentially, we'll see. May, I don't know. I think maybe Copenhagen, but I'd rather one in the US. I'd rather not travel far again. But with that said, there might be an opportunity to do a GlobeRunners camp, a GlobeRunners training experience in May in Europe. So if that's the case, then we're looking at potentially Portugal, because the Boulder one in April is obviously the second one in the US. We want to do one outside the US. And I think that having one in Europe in May would be a great idea. Portugal's fantastic weather then. So that's definitely an option. June, Grand Mars. I'm already in the elite field in Grand Mars. Gold Coast, July. August, Helsinki. September, I don't know. October, probably Amsterdam. I actually missed the Chicago Marathon cutoff, even though I probably can force my way in if I send a bunch of emails. But the elite field closed in November, sub-elite field. Like I'm almost a year out. It's bizarre. I went to enter it the other day because I thought that it was January that they opened up, and it's like, it's closed mid-November. I was like, the race is in October. Anyways, November, probably Indianapolis again. I love Indianapolis, just love the course. 3 hours drive away from where I live. November, and then December, I'm not sure. Probably CIM again maybe, because I would like to get better at running on hilly courses. But then potentially maybe even Pisa. I do like Pisa Marathon. But CIM is just really good for sub-elite runners between... I mean, what did I come running 2:19:45? I think I came 40th or something, or maybe even further back. So it's just really good competition. So Valencia is also an option, but Valencia is really hard to get into. I'm not even sure if I'll be able to get into that. So yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan for right now anyway. I don't know if I'll stick to that 100%. Who knows? Injuries come up, sickness comes up, other things come up. I don't know, but that's the idea right now. And yeah, but I'm almost certain that won't work out. That won't go to exact plan, but we shall see. So yeah, I probably should have mentioned in the intro. I was actually considering in the last 5 minutes redoing the intro, but I really don't want to edit these things. I'd rather just do it straight shot. But the Boulder camp, this is pretty silly to promote. This is the very end of the podcast because I'm looking at the timer on my camera. It's 57 minutes. Boulder Experience GlobeRunners is about to release. We've had about 100 people express interest through the video. Super exciting. April 4 to the 7th. It's going to be in Boulder, Colorado, one of the best places in the world to train, in my opinion. All-inclusive, meals, accommodation. We have running seminars, education. We also might be doing some running physiology stuff, potentially, with a individual in Boulder that specializes in that. I think we'll also do some strength-focused stuff with a gym coach there called Keith, potentially. So there's plenty of interesting things that will happen on this experience. We will go to Denver. We will go to the Rocky Mountains. We will go to plenty of awesome areas around Boulder to explore as well. So really looking forward to that. If you are interested, there is a link in the description of this podcast where you can express interest, or you can just go to thegloberunners.com and find the page and you can express interest there. But that will be opening up very soon in the next, hopefully, week. And I think this will sell out pretty quickly because Arizona sold out in about a month, and Arizona is not even a great place to run. Well, at least where we're basing. As in, it's a decent... Sorry, I shouldn't say that for the people that have booked. It's a good place to run, but it's nothing compared to Boulder. Although in the Arizona trip, we are going to Flagstaff for the day. So that's obviously an awesome place to run. So yeah, we'd love for you to join us. We've got plenty more GlobeRunners experiences coming up in the next, few months as well that we're planning. Europe, Australia potentially, South America potentially. Super exciting. Hope to see you on one of them. And yeah, I love the idea of running and traveling and meeting people. It's just awesome. But I can see the timer at the top of my phone here saying 59 minutes, so I better wrap up. And my friend at the Athletics Integrity Unit is switching off, the guy that took down Mo Katia, I think. So I better switch off too. So thank you everyone for listening. I really appreciate you all. I will tune in next week with an episode just before Houston. And yeah, let's see if the plan is still the same. But really looking forward to racing there and seeing probably some of you listening in Houston as well. So if you do see me at the expo or around the race, please do come and say hi. Always love it when people come up and say hello. So I will speak to you all next week. And until then, all the best.